Welcome to the Mountain Valor podcast. Our guest today is Jack Shelar. Jack has a special mission he does on his own, and he is loosely connected to the Wounded Warrior Project. In fact, this is actually Jack's Wounded Warrior mission. Jack joined the U.S. Marine Corps in the summer of 2000 with the intention of becoming an infantry officer and building a resume for the FBI. September 11th changed everything. He enlisted with the ambition to become an officer after he had some experience under his belt. It was important for him to ensure that he maintained the highest level of discipline so he could then apply for the officer candidate school to become an officer. In 2006, the trajectory of his career completely changed. A spot which he didn't even know existed came open at the Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, and there was a need for a highly respected Marine. He was selected and reported to Landstuhl to serve as the Marine Liaison for injured Marines coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan. It was a 6-month deployment, and the Marines had made it clear that it was only for 6 months due to the trauma experienced at the hospital. He served alongside the 435th CASF, which was the Air Force component that transported patients from the flight line to the hospital. This experience changed everything for him. The time he spent in the ICU with our injured, as well as with the families coming over to say goodbye to their son or husband, became his life. At the end of this deployment, he went back to his command, where he spent another year and a half until being tasked to go back to the hospital. Apparently, the squadron commander of the CASF had requested him by name, and the Marine Corps obliged. He went back to Landstuhl for another 3 years. He had 11 years in the Marine Corps when he decided that he had had enough and got out with the hope of finding work in a not-for-profit dealing with our injured. Wounded Warrior Project called him and asked him if he would go back to the hospital in Germany to establish a footprint there for them. After that, he spent another year and a half before taking a job at Tampa Polytrauma. In 2018, he and his wife, Kristen, decided they should buy a small RV and travel the country visiting the Marines that he cared for in Landstuhl. By the way, Jack met his wife in Germany in 2011 as she worked for Dobbs Schools in Germany. They've been wandering around the country ever since, visiting our nation's warfighters along with Gold Star families he met in Germany. They have averaged 100 visits a year and plan on continuing with this mission with the hopes of building onto their mission in the future. Jack, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Nick. I really appreciate it.
Well, you have an amazing story, and I would love for everyone to hear this amazing story.
Thanks.
Looking back, how does it feel to know that your discipline as a young Marine, long before 9/11, was the specific key that opened the door to your life's mission?
Wow. I grew up a strict household. Father was Navy, grandfather was Army. Sports was a part of my life. And I think, I made decisions based on the fact that I wanted to go places, knowing, at a young age, how you can make a mistake that could divert your path. And eventually for me, it paid dividends with the Marine Corps, for sure, when I was sent to the hospital in Germany.
Jack, most people understand what an infantry officer does, but many don't know what a Marine Liaison does at a combat hospital. Can you describe the weight of being the first Marine face an injured warrior saw when they woke up in Germany?
It was humbling, to say the least. I can to see the young Lance Corporal or Corporal who was on the battlefield the day before, who had now suffered a traumatic injury, and to see their eyes light up when they saw, the U.S. Marine on the uniform. They knew that they were in a place that they could understand, or at least that there was someone there who was going to help guide them through that process. It's a scary process, to be honest. I mean, you wake up, out of an injury and you're at a new place and you don't know where you're at. And it was something that was directed from Congress. I mean, Congress felt it important enough to be like, when an injured Marine lands at an MTF or a major hospital, there will be another Marine there to greet him. And, I kind of joked with people. I was like the Walmart greeter, welcome to Landstuhl. I'm going to give you over to the surgeons and the nurses. But I'm here if you need help.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's extremely important. I remember many, many years ago, I was in Germany. I was actually an Army infantry officer in Germany, and one of my soldiers got hit by a BMW and ended up in Landstuhl, and actually he ended up in a German hospital first, and then eventually got transferred to Landstuhl. But he was unconscious, and my platoon sergeant and I went to the hospital, and he was the first person or the first people he saw when he woke up. And I'll be honest with you, had he woke up and there was a German doctor hanging over him, he would have had no idea where he was at. But we woke him up by yelling at him, and he woke up, and then it was like, oh, what's my platoon leader and platoon sergeant doing here? Where am I? Kind of thing. But I could see how that is extremely important, that, hey, someone that I can relate to is here. And that also speaks to, like you said, that the U.S. Marine Corps thought it was important enough that not just a soldier, not an airman, not a seaman, but a Marine be there. That's very welcoming. And I'm imagining that most of them felt very good about, hey, a brother Marine is here with me, So that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing.
Yes, sir. It was difficult to try to get the other branches of service to understand that I was not medical and that I had no medical knowledge. So, they'd ask me to do a procedure, and I'm like, look, but no,
you could have totally played that one. Get a stethoscope and act like
a white coat, walk around the hospital like a doctor.
That's hilarious. You were requested by name by an Air Force squadron commander to return for a second 3-year tour, or a second tour. It tended out to be a 3-year tour. What was it about your approach to patient care or family support that made a different branch of the military demand a Marine stay on station?
Oh, it's an excellent question. I've thought about that over the years. And I was kind of thrown into the fire. They needed a quick fill back in 2006. And within my first week, I had 3 Marines from 2nd Force Recon Battalion who had come in, sustained severe injuries. Actually, all 3 of them had ended up passing away, but one of them, their family came on deck, the wife and his mother and father. And just watching the interactions, of a fellow Marine, his family, I think I learned very quickly that this job was special, and I took it very seriously. I think that's the only. It became my life. The kids in ICU, their family members. I could always hear my mom sitting on my shoulder being like, you take care of him like he's your brother. And obviously he is a Marine, but when you see the wife and the mother and the father and the sorrow that they're in, and just, I just did everything I could to be there, to be present with them.
Right.
And I think I lived that every day. And I think the squadron commander, his name was Major Langevin. He saw that. It's not going to hurt either. I really helped their softball team get to the championship. I'd like to think it was my work ethic in the hospital room.
Yeah. And let me ask you, was it tougher to go back, or was it tougher to do this job the first time?
No, I found my niche, a niche that I didn't know existed. And so I think it's similar to like your combat soldiers, your combat Marines. It's like, they come home and they're like, no, I want to get back to the battlefield.
Right.
When I came back, my life had been turned upside down and I wanted to get back to the hospital. I felt like that was where I could have an impact for the Marine Corps, for my country, was in the hospital room rather than a battlefield, which was really a strange feeling, being a Marine.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. The reason I asked that question is, the first time you do something traumatic, you really don't know what's going to happen. You've heard what's going to happen, and then it happens and you're like, okay, well, that sucked. That was bad. But then when you have to do it again, it's like, now exactly what's going on. I mean, I can relate that to, first time I was in combat, I was like, well, I don't know what this is like. I don't know what it's going to be like. But then the next time it was like, okay, I'm going to pay a little bit more attention because I know how bad it can be. So that was the reason I asked that question. The Marine Corps capped your deployment at 6 months due to the trauma that you were going to experience, but you stayed for years. And so a very important question is, how did you protect your own mental health while being the primary support for these brave Marines and the families that were flying over to at some time saying their final goodbyes?
It was mission first. And to be honest, I think it's difficult for people to understand, and even military members I talk to now, the pace of the hospital at that time was incredible. You had 2-3 flights coming in. On those flights, you'd have several Marines severely injured. You got to get them in, and so I don't know if it really hit me until I left Germany.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Right.
It was just go, and you're doing it, and then I'm kind of glad that we didn't have downtime. I have friends who are like, oh, did you travel? And I was like, no, you don't understand. It was 365. I mean, it was 24/7, 365. You were moving. And it wasn't until later on, back in Florida where, I sat back and was like, wow, I'm tired.
Yeah.
I'm tired.
Yeah. Mentally exhausted. And yeah, I could understand how, while you're in the moment, nothing else matters. But then later on, you have the opportunity to think about it and go, wow, that was something.
Yeah. I think of what's going on in Iran right now. And, I think of the team that's there, and it's, I don't envy them because it's good. They're not getting the numbers that we had, obviously. But at the same time, I think that can make it more difficult because they have time to actually see what's happening.
Right.
They have a day or two to process, where, back in 2008, there was no time for that.
Right. Yeah. So I could see how having some downtown time and thinking about this could definitely, that could definitely be difficult, very difficult, and maybe even too difficult for you to want to go back in the ICU and see these guys as they're coming off the bird. Wow. You were on your way out of the military with a hope to work for nonprofits when the Wounded Warrior Project called, and they asked you to go back to Landstuhl as a civilian to build a footprint for them. How did that feel? What was that like?
It was sort of funny because I worked for Wounded Warrior Project there for about a year and a half. And I think for a year and a half, the doctors and nurses, every time they saw me, they were like, "Oh, it's nice to see you in civilian attire. I'm glad you're getting some downtime, and they could not comprehend that I was no longer in the Marine Corps.
Oh,
It was, which really benefited, the organization and myself. I didn't have to jump through hoops.
right.
But going into the room was very different. When you go into the room as a Marine, visiting a Marine, there's a connection that you don't have. There's an unspoken connection,
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you put on a polo shirt and khakis, you're a civilian.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
it was humbling to me because, I'm a civilian now. Like, I know once a Marine, always a Marine. But I had to take different approaches. It was a humbling experience going in as a civilian.
I'm sure that you still had a short haircut and you still looked like a Marine, but like you said, you weren't wearing the uniform. So you had to establish some rapport a different way, and so I'm sure that could be very interesting. And I'm assuming that you dealt with not just Marines, you dealt with any servicemen at that point with the Wounded Warrior Project. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I still dealt with ICU, but I dealt with all the branches. And even going back as a Marine Liaison, I did visit the soldiers and airmen and corpsmen that were in ICU just because,
right.
I mean, it was our battle. And just because I was a Marine didn't mean I was going to leave the guy just because he was a soldier to my right. But yeah, with Wounded Warrior Project, it was definitely a more direct, like I'm going to sit and I'm going to spend, certain amount of time with each guy, get to know them, get to know like what I can do for them, their needs back stateside, what their family's going to be doing. So
let's talk about your current mission, which isn't really tremendously different than your earlier mission. But in 2018, you and your wife decided to buy a small RV and travel around the country to visit these Marines that you had dealt with at Landstuhl. Was there one specific Marine or one specific moment that convinced you that a phone call wasn't enough, that you had to show up at their front door?
So there's been 5 quadruple amputees that have passed through Landstuhl that have survived. I've been bedside with 4 of them. And one of them tried taking his life, I want to say in the end of 2016. And it hit me hard. If a quadruple amputee, I won't say his name, but if he wanted to go to the moon, Elon Musk would find a way to get him to the moon.
Right.
There was nothing that he was lacking in terms of want, right? But when he decided, when he got out of the hospital after his attempt, My wife and I was like, phone calls aren't doing it. A Marine's going to tell me, hey, I'm doing great.
Yep.
But until I can look him in the eyes, see how he's living, important, talk to his wife. That's when you're going to get a feel for how they're really doing. And so that began the process. And when my wife finally said, you need to do this, I think it was for my well-being as well. In Germany, I didn't have time. You got them on the bird. You spend a day or two with them and you sent them, and then you had another Marine replace them. You never knew what happened to that Marine. So I think for my well-being too, it's like, hey, I want to go see these guys. I want to see how they're doing. I want to see if there's anything that, that I can do to assist with them having a better life, and to let them know that I haven't forgotten what they've done. My family has sure not forgotten what they've done. And I wanted them to know that. I wanted them to know that, like, there's a Marine family in Southwest Virginia that thinks about you, that prays for you every day. They're always on my mind. And but it was the beginning was definitely when Todd tried to take his life.
And I'm sure that you reconnecting with them changes everything, right? I mean, like you said, it's easy, the idea of calling somebody that, calling a brother that you're not sure about and saying, hey, is everything okay? Well, of course, what's he going to say? Yeah, everything's fine. I mean, there's even a song about that called, Everything's Fine or something like that. A Christian song that I'm not sure if I'm getting the title correctly, but the reality is that, that's not enough. And that's not even the right question to ask, right? But I'm sure that, when you show up on their doorstep and they're like, wow, Jack went out of his way to come see me, me, not somebody else. He came to see me. I'm sure that has got to, that's got to be such a joyous occasion. And for that Marine to go, man, you know what? Someone really does care for me, and my life does have meaning, because, I don't want to disappoint Jack, because if I disappoint Jack, that won't be good. He won't like that. So that's got to be, what a tremendous feeling that's got to be for a Marine to, seeing you and your wife show up and say, and I mean, I'm assuming you spend an hour, a couple hours with them, but just the idea that, wow, that's huge. That's huge.
My average visit is 4.5 hours.
Okay.
The first visit is average 4.5. So, I go into it completely it's like a blind date, kind of. They don't really remember me because, for the most part, they were
blurry, right. Everything was blurry when.
Yeah. Heavily medicated. So it's a blind first date. And, it typically, it's the best 4.5 hours of my life.
Yeah. Wow. That is, that is very special. Very special. So let me ask you about some insight here. You average 100 visits a year with warfighters and Gold Star families. After 6 years on the road, what's the most common thing these warriors or families tell you they need from the civilian world?
There is a huge disconnect between the civilian world and the military in general. Then you dissect it further, because then you have the war fighters, which is a small percent of the military. You need a lot of support when when you're in combat. And I think they just have a very difficult time fitting into that culture. Uh, I think they hold a bit of, one a phrase I hear they don't understand. They don't understand. They don't understand. I don't fit in. And which is true. But I try to give them a little bit of, I try to do this with my daughter too, and it doesn't always work. But it's like, look, there's a reason you joined the Marine Corps. You joined the Marine Corps so your neighbor doesn't have to carry that burden. It's a burden that you have to carry. It's a burden you chose to carry. And we can't hold our neighbors accountable for not understanding. That's unfair. So until you, as the warfighter, can get over that, you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle because our society today, it's nothing like what we learned in boot camp. We care for the guys to our left and right. There's a lot of honor, a lot of commitment. In the civilian world is, what can I do to get to the top? Who can I crawl over to get that job promotion or to be in a better position, make more money? And in the military, we don't think like that.
I did get that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I want to comment about that because I remember many years ago working, and I had to go do something I don't remember with the military, and I remember my boss who never served in the military, and he said something like, "Well, I was going to join the military, but I had better things to do," and I was like, I didn't do this just because I didn't have anything else better to do, and I think that's, I want to branch off from that because. When you joined the Marine Corps in 2000, you had no idea that, here 26 years later, you're still on this same mission, right? I mean, it was, the hand of God was moving things around so that he knew that someone had to do this and he picked you. So talk a little bit about that if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, to whom much is given, much is required. And I was given a very unique opportunity during a very unique time in in our country's history. And that impact was just, I don't know, seeing a 19-year-old kid laying in a bed with tubes all over and missing his lower extremities and ultimately, he's doing it for people that he doesn't know. He's sacrificing and I get to see it. I get to be one of the first people he opens his eyes to. People like it. People are like, oh, it's got to be hard. It's got to be traumatic and emotionally draining, and it is. It is. But it was an opportunity that God gave me, and I don't want to fail in that mission. It's too important of a mission. These kids gave life and limb. And right. So for me to have a bad night's sleep, I'll get over it. I'll wake up in the morning and I'll get out of bed on my two legs and brush my teeth and, be able to hold my daughter. There's a lot of kids that sacrificed a lot for our nation during this past, GWAT time in our history. And, I was given a unique opportunity, was humbled by it. And now it's like, to me, that's, I tell my friend that I'll die doing this. This is what I'll die doing. And it is well worth every minute, every mile that I put on that RV.
Right. Well, I mean, but, when you left the military, you could have said, okay, mission complete, time to go do something else, but you didn't. You you didn't even follow into somebody's footsteps. You were the trailblazer that said this mission has to be done, and I can't just say, well, someone else needs to do it. You showed the leadership of I'm the one that's going to do it, and I'm hoping that maybe there are other people out there that will hear you today and go, you know what, I need to do this, even if I'm just doing it for my friends, in my community, my brothers and sisters in arms in my community. But you did something that, is there someone else that's doing what you're doing out there that you know of?
Not that I know of. I mean, I think that there's someone who's traveling the country, wanting to get war stories from guys, which is great. But, as we had talked before, this is my ministry. I don't expect my neighbor to do this because my neighbor didn't see it.
Right.
I saw it. And for me to turn my head on it or to bury my sand would be wrong. This is what God's put on my heart. And I think is I try to follow that and do my best to, honor him and to honor my Marines that I had the opportunity to be bedside with.
Right. You talked about continuing this mission and growing this mission. What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So my wife, she was a professor at university and, so she's a little bit smarter than I am. And when we embarked on this, I did want to learn something. I was like, we're going to have a unique opportunity to be in the house of kids who have seen things that very few people can understand. It's like, we have to learn something. And I've learned that faith and family, you show me a guy that's doing well with his transition, and I'll show you a guy who has a faith, and it's typically Christianity, and a family support system. And so, we bought property in Floyd, Virginia. There's a lot of wonderful not-for-profits out there. But what I can do, or what I'm hoping to do, is I'm put a cabin up on the property and have it open to where families can, if the cabin is open and it's available, they can come and spend a couple days, hopefully make a few memories, sit in nature, experience the town of Floyd, which is a wonderful place to live, and just hopefully create bonds with each other that hopefully can last through difficult moments in life. I mean, we all, whether you're civilian or military, whether you've seen combat or whether you're, you work at Virginia Tech, we all have ups and downs. And I want to make sure that when there is a down, that maybe there's a connection somewhere where they can turn to. And hopefully, it's with their spouse. If not their spouse, and they can give me a call, or they can be like, hey, Jack, is the cabin open? I want to come and just spend a couple days in the mountains.
Right. Yeah. I love that idea. And you're right. Floyd, Virginia, the Blue Ridge, gorgeous up here. And you can't come up here and not experience God, because he created some beautiful property here in Floyd, Virginia. Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Jack, what final thoughts do you want to leave with our podcast viewers today?
Well, I'll tell you, like what I tell my Marines when I leave, that they always have someone to call. And I would tell my military guys, just like, look, pick up the phone and call somebody you served with. Let them know that you're thinking of them. We live it's a crazy time. We're disconnected. The military community, the Marine Corps, it's a tight-knit community, but we leave the military, we leave the Marine Corps, and we go on our ways. And I know that I've listened to the stories. It's like, pick up the phone, call that guy that you served with, let him know that you're thinking of him.
Yeah.
We have to look out for each other. And, I would, the civilian world too, call a friend from high school that you haven't talked to. Because it's a tough place. It's a tough world. And, it's nice to know if people are thinking about you.
Yeah, that's phenomenal advice. And, I've committed, I've got a couple of friends, not that I served with in the military, but they're both retired military. And, they keep saying, "Hey, give me a call sometime." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll give you a call sometime." And now I've got it on my calendar that, hey, I'm calling this guy every Wednesday at noon just to see how he's doing, and he may not have anything to say, and we may talk for hours, but you're absolutely right. That's great advice. And it doesn't matter military or not military, yeah, we could all do better by telling people that we love them,
Yes,
absolutely.
sir.
Absolutely. Jack,
Yes, sir.
it's been a pleasure chatting with you. For those of you watching this podcast, I hope you've received some pearls of wisdom, and I hope you will join me for the next Mountain Valor podcast coming soon. At Mountain Valor, we believe that rural should never mean unserved. Whether you're a veteran looking for the benefits you earned, a neighbor wanting to volunteer your time, or a donor ready to fund our next mission in the hills of Virginia, or a partner organization, there's a place for you on our team. Visit mountainvalor.org.com today to donate, join our mission, or get the support your family deserves. Together, we can build the system that our rural veterans have always earned but never had. Thank you.
Thank you.